Thanks everyone, and thanks for joining us. And I don't have anything to present. I'm just gonna pass it on to Rahul, who's gonna talk a little bit more about the work that he's done and his book that you can find later down. Just walk down the street. I was gonna say, just walk down here and you'll find it. But without further ado, Rahul, thanks for joining us. Thank you.
So thanks for having me, Paolo and Stefania. It's good to be in a space that I count as part of my academic home, talking about the work that I'm doing here. So we're going to talk for maybe half an hour, just pitching the core ideas that are in my book and hopefully finding connections. Then I invited 3 folks to come up and talk about the connections they see, and then we'll just chat about questions or have ideas. We can be in conversation about it. So first, we're at a university, and it's a hard time to be at a university right now. So I just want to make a shout out to people that are fighting for that, and to have the space, both sort of mentally and physically, to actually defend why universities are important, the research we do, and why it matters and the impacts it has on communities. Obviously, the book is called Community Data, so I care about that a lot. So just a shout out to people that are finding ways to defend that right now in the moment we're in. Oh no, don't turn it off. There we go. So I want to specifically talk about doing data work in community. And I want to talk about it in a number of ways to sort of set some of the ideas I introduced in the book, and then talk about some examples that try to change how we think about what data looks like.
I just wanted to.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think we may need to. Let me just remove this.
Nope. We'll see how long it lasts.
Okay.
So I want to start with this bar chart. It's like a standard kind of looking bar chart. You can see the bars underneath our little TV message. This is Chicago's 2020 budget. And I just want you to guess, what do you think? So City of Chicago, different budgets within city government. What do you think the tallest bar is? What section of government do you think it is? Policing. Yeah. So as you all guessed, police department around 1.8 billion. These smaller bars, which you can't see above this little note, public health, housing, things like that. It's the kind of bar chart you would see at a civic meeting update or something like that in the evening in the city. Here's the same chart shown in a different way. Oh, that's annoying. Well, at least we can see more of it. Here's the same chart shown in a different way. Right? So this is a chart on the street representing the same budget sections of the city of Chicago, made with stacks of cardboard boxes. So this is protesters in 2020, UIP 100 and others, as part of the defund the police movement, arguing that that money should be allocated differently in order to produce better outcomes for their city. Right? Same bar chart. Bar chart, bar chart. Made out of cardboard boxes stacked. Why is that important? Well, 1, cardboard's fun, but 2, this chart speaks of authority and truth usually. Right? Data looks truthy. It's it's a bar chart. It must be right. It has decimals in it, it sounds truthy. The boxes are rigid and fixed. This chart, literally this man is moving them. He's about to take those boxes and move them somewhere. So the media that they're showing the data in, the stack of bar charts, lends itself to the idea that they're arguing about, that we can actually change this. We can take this bar over here and we can move it and put it over here. We can take some of that police budget and move it to public health, which doesn't look like you can do it here, but in this media, you can literally just move boxes. So that even still making a bar chart, just that shift of the material you're using tells a different story. It tells a story about the idea that change is possible, which was part of their argument. Plus, it's a spectacle. It's big on the street. You want to walk up to it and be well, why is there a big stack of boxes here? What's up with that? It makes you curious. It piques your curiosity. And I think that is a good example of the difference that I'm talking about. The impact on the street of this spectacle. The idea that you can sort of participate and change it. The idea that it's reflecting the data back to the city itself, in the city, on the street. The idea that they're telling a story around it. All of these are central elements for the argument I want to make, that data has moved from traditional places we've used it to new domains that require us rethinking the toolbox that we use to tell data stories. And that's what I'm going to focus on, is how we rethink that toolbox, why, and give you some examples. And that's what the book is about. We're used to seeing charts like this. This is the famous Hans Rosling Gapminder chart, scatter plot, animated, about how the world's getting better in many ways. That's great, super cool. And this kind of showing of information has sort of taken hold in multiple ways. And Eduardo Galeano, the famous Uruguayan author, wrote a piece about it. We'll see if it comes back in a second.
Yay!
He wrote a piece in his book of embraces. He wrote a piece that I think talks about it really nicely. He said, in Central America, the more wretched and desperate the people, the more the statistics smile and laugh. And I think that gets to the point really well, that like sometimes this stuff doesn't really capture the experience of what it's like, right? It almost dehumanizes it because it's so abstract. And it serves a purpose and it has a role to play, but maybe it's not quite the right tool to use when you're in community settings. Because of this kind of gap that happens where you're losing some of that humanity. And I think that's because, my argument is that's because data was designed for a certain set of domains, and we're using it in another set of domains. What do I mean by data? I mean the methods and the media we use to understand and represent data. Charts and graphs, surveys, spreadsheets. These tools were designed, they came to maturity in fields like business, science, statistics, epidemiology. That's where they came to maturity. Their history before that is much worse. It's like, in racist eugenics and things like that. So, but that's where they came to maturity. And now we're using them in these other domains. Things like libraries, civic meetings, street protests, newsrooms, museums. This is a very different space. And so when you think about that, I call these collectively pro-social settings. So places that are specifically trying to improve social outcomes for lots of different people. And I think about that as a difference in goals, right? Whereas the original domains, those methods were designed around like scientific investigation, finding truth, finding evidence. These new domains where data is being used now, they care things like participation, power, your belief that you can make change, justice, joy, right? That's a very different list. These are two very different lists. Yes, we've taken that toolbox and brought it over to this new space without really thinking too hard about the methods. And I think that's creating conflict in a way that needs to be addressed. So over the last 15, 20 years, I've been trying to address it in a variety of ways. And this is one way to say it, like our dominant approaches to data don't really fit the pro-social settings. A more blunt way to say it is the difference between these two images, right? A lot of the history of data is about a set of tools that are used to enact power over other groups. And if you want to use these tools and methods to actually build your own power and take that yourself, I think some rethinking needs to happen. And that rethinking means we need to do less of that and maybe a bit more of that. So how do we do that? That's a question I've been asking for about 15 years. Like, how do we do that effectively? And so I came up with a set of what I think are principles. If that looks a lot like an outline for a book, you're right. It is an outline for a book. That book is back there. Once I realized that, I was like, oh, bing, all right, maybe I should write a book about this. So these principles, the book delves into each of them. And rather than trying to explain all that in a short amount of time, what I'd rather do is highlight a couple of examples that I think evoke these principles in a variety of ways so that we can talk about them in concrete ways. And for me, that bigger toolbox, which sort of these principles can help guide you through, is about borrowing and learning from those new places where data is being used. It's about looking at the things that the pro-social sector is good at, like curating knowledge, crafting stories, interpreting culture, learning from their mechanisms and their methods, and then mashing that up with the way we do data now. So let me get to the second part of what I want to talk about, which is a richer set of examples. And I want to do that with a couple of examples that I highlight in the book that I think are evocative for the types of things I want to think about. So the first is a mural from Philadelphia called How We Fish. So How We Fish started as a social project to understand what work meant to people in the city of Philly. This is in 2012. What does work mean to people? What do they get out of it? Why do we do the work we do? So it was a question that they decided to gather data around. They hosted conversations with local food. They gathered a bunch of notes. It was a qualitative data project to understand how people thought about work and what it meant to them in their communities, lots of different subcultures. And then they stitched that together. They stitched that together into a visual design of a mural that they invited people to participate in making. This is the final mural. It's beautiful, one of I don't know how many they have in Philly now, 10 billion Philly murals. It's so great. I passed 20 on the way to walk to get this picture, just in 2 blocks. I finally found this. You have to leave the main square of Philly, the main historical square, and you turn left, and there's this old falling down police building, and then you turn right, and you go past these train tracks, and then this mural. And it's beautiful. And this mural tells that story. Both the symbols and the messages are directly connected to the data that they collected. And there's quotes embedded in there. It's made both of mosaic and painted, and it was community built. They had a bunch of painting sessions where they not only painted, but also shared the data back. So this is my argument that this is a qualitative data mural. My wife and I have been doing data murals for 12, 15 years in lots of different places around the world, and that's been picked up by other places too that were inspired by our efforts to say that, look, we can take the power and the history of making murals and their ability to influence public opinion, spark conversation, sure, beautify the space, and mash that up with data. And say that if we can have data-inspired murals, how can those two potentials for power come together? So we've been doing it. We think this is a great example of a similar approach. And it's one that they created bonds within the people participating in ways that continue still today. So it's not just that this mural was painted. It's also that all of these people work together and make it. Right? So in community settings, that visualization isn't the only output that you care about. You also want to reinforce those connections. So I think this is a great example of how we can make our systems more participatory and reflect data back to the community. They found the story they wanted to tell in this themselves. It wasn't shipped off to some expert data analyzer who sent back a PDF. It was analyzed and then painted as a mural by the community themselves. So, second example, this one's a little heavier and deals with violence. Fenómeno en silencio. So this is a project from Mexico, which deals with huge populations of people that have disappeared. So they've been killed or kidnapped in various ways. And there are colectivos, so there are groups of mothers that basically go out and try to find the people or their bones every day. So Marta was working with one of these groups, and as part of a documentary film that was being made. And she decided she wanted to do an art project around this, something that would activate the memory and their fight to find justice or truth and evidence. So what she did was she started a WhatsApp group. A WhatsApp group where she asked the mothers to send a message that they would send to their person if they found them today. So, me busco su mamá, no te voy a fallar, te amo, your mother is looking for you, I will not fail you, I love you. Right? The message they would send that person now. And then a photo as well. And they took all that and they made these amazing, let's see if that plays. That middle one should be a video. Okay, great. So they took the photo and the message and they printed it and they put it in this little plastic orb, this little ball. And then they went to the place where the person was born or lived. And they took this plastic bowl and they put some of the dirt that they were born on in there and then put the ball in there. And then on Mother's Day, day of protest in the squares, they created a public spectacle where they made 50 of these. There were more messages, but they made 50. They took that data set that they had collected and created literally a spreadsheet to put it out there. They took that data set and they turned it into these physical artifacts, this data sculpture that they then performed by carrying it through the city. I cry every time I watch the video. It's amazing. These mothers walking down the street, it's evocative of the womb, right? Evocative of the womb. And then they laid them in one of the squares, one of the plazas de Independencia, and they've done that. They did that a couple times across the country. And the power it evokes from a data set, engaging people on the street in spectacle to think about like the issue and to figure out the support, all from that data set, translating through the arts and performance. An incredibly powerful example for me, and the kind of thing we don't usually think about as data visualization, right? We don't think about that as data storytelling. For me it is. It's a powerful example of how if we have this broader toolbox and goals like activating the public, you can come up with these examples that push us to learn from the language of the arts to see how we can create impact with data and community, because that's one of the central goals, is creating that impact. So, third example, this was a bit more playful. This is from Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, I don't know if everyone's from LA, but there's a part of town called Skid Row. Skid Row has traditionally been an area where there's been large numbers of unhoused people or people that were recently unhoused. And to the point where that's happened for so many decades, they've built a strong social fabric together. There's a bunch of places that actually support and network and try to help them fight for their rights as residents of the city. Because it's the city is always trying to change the zoning and say, hey, no, we don't want this. We want to tear this all down and build like fancy high-rises, right? The city is always trying to change that zoning. So they're constantly fighting for their right to be there in that part of the city in Skid Row. One of the more recent times that happened, 2017, there was a plan. The plan involved like tearing down a bunch of places they lived and a bunch of the services. And so the unhoused population said, no, we're going to fight back. And they fought back by creating a data-inspired mini golf course, which I think is great for two reasons. One, I love mini golf. It's super fun. And two, it's a spatial, like experiential intervention, right? It's not like we're gonna protest by showing you a slideshow with our data. Like, no, we're gonna reach out to people in a more novel way that might get more people interested and excited. So this was the LAPD, the other LAPD, the Los Angeles Poverty Department. They run an archive and a museum space, and they run the nation's only, or perhaps the world's only, as far as we can tell, theatrical troupe made up entirely of unhoused people. So they, with an artist, designed this mini golf course, and each hole was based on data. This one you can see these sort of reminiscent of bar charts showing you different data. Some of them are more historical data. The final one was really funny because it was a map on a ramp. You know, the final hole in mini golf course, you like putt it and then your ball is gone. Right? So and then that's the end of it. So they had a little hole on this map, and the map was of what would happen after the zoning. And the hole was like the size of what the area for their community would be. And so you would try to putt it, and even if you got in, it wouldn't go in because the hole was too small. Like you couldn't get the ball in the hole. So it had this great way of thinking about like, okay, how can we translate this into a playful way to experience the data? And you could just go and like play it like a mini golf course. That's totally fun. Or if you read one layer of the signage and thought about it, you would get a little bit of the data. If you read one more, you would understand even more. They had one on the wall that was literally a line chart where you had to like climb up a ladder and roll your ball down the line that showed the decrease in housing units. And that's how you played the hole. In addition to that, they said, this is really cool, but we have this amazing theatrical troupe. Let's make fun of all the politicians that are making these decisions about zoning on the golf course, right? The back nine, the piece was called. So we all have seen this caricature, but like this is actually what was happening. They were actually having conversations on the golf course. And we know this because 3 years later, 7 out of the 9 counselors are indicted and in jail, right? So like they were right, it was illegal what they were doing. So they made this play that was like this caricature that was half improvised, half scripted, where they would play the course and people would watch, and it was making fun of the way this was happening and ignoring the community's point of view. And then they opened it up so anybody could come in and play this course. So who came? Turns out the city planners came. And suddenly a relationship that could have been very antagonistic between the actual people who draw up the plans, not the politicians who are like fighting over the real estate stuff, but the people who actually made the plans, they showed up. And they suddenly were in dialogue with LAPD. And to this day, they still talk to each other. which is great because that gave them a doorway to power. And they only showed up because it was a mini golf course, and they were like, we gotta go see what this is. So again, an example that's like, if there is a space bigger than our toolbox of charts and graphs and spreadsheets and surveys and stuff like that, a point outside the space, right? That tries to argue that we can have a bigger set of things that we do. We can use joy and playfulness and the arts to try to tell these stories differently, to create impacts in communities that the communities are actually trying to achieve, right? So, more experiments. I'm trying to push beyond that in my own work in a couple different ways. One is work with my wife Emily, a welded table we made called 1659, which is a data sculpture about food security. So during the pandemic, we were really upset about the increase, and we looked at the numbers, and we found that at the peak of the pandemic, 1,659 households a day were applying for SNAP benefits, so food assistance from the state, which is an insane number, but it's almost fathomable, right? It's not like 20,000. I can't imagine 20,000. Like 1,600, like that's a lot, but I can almost picture that many. So this table is made out of that many pieces of cutlery welded together. I welded on one or two of them. They fell off because I suck at that. Emily did all the rest of them because she's good at that. So she designed this amazing table that tries to tell that story in a way that draws people in. Because you walk up to it and you're like, whoa, what is this, the table? What is this made out of? And then you're curious. You're curious about why there's this table somewhere. And it sparks you to ask a question about that. And then maybe you'll go the next step to like check the QR code and watch some of the stuff, or you'll just find out it's about food security. And maybe if you're at a gallery in Wellesley where we showed it, you'll find out that it's a problem in your community too. Or maybe if you're at a farmer's market in front of City Hall where we showed it, you'll say, oh, can I sign up for that? So it has different outcomes because it speaks to people in a different way, using data. So Marcus might speak to this a little bit. We're doing an experiment around sonification. I've gotten pretty annoyed at the idea of sonifying data by doing like bleeps and bloops. There's a lot of work where there is data being turned into sound, and it sounds sort of like the sound like something going up and down. Like, yeah, it's a little bit of a character, but there's a lot of that, and I'm kind of annoyed by it. As someone that like plays rhythms, I play percussion. It's kind of annoying to me. It's kind of an affront. So I was like, this is not okay. We need more examples. So I convinced Marcus to do a piece with me that we're performing. We check the QR code. Come on the 28th, which is also my birthday, to the Media in Motion event, which will be in the library over here. Full day of programs, and then around 5 o'clock we'll be doing a short performance of a live sonification composed for our drum troupe that is talks about climate emissions in India and the US and Brazil. Each of which has like really strong rhythmic histories. And we're doing an experiment to see what it feels like. I've only found one or two other like musical sonifications that are performed like that. And I think we can do better than loops and bloops. So I want to contribute to that growing set of things. So that's with our friend Lily here, Lily Gabory. And then the next thing I'm working on to push even further is with some other folks in the Data Theater Collaborative here at Northeastern. We're working on an idea of civic data theater, which I'm super excited to do because it argues that idea of like an evening meeting where there's a PowerPoint and the government official is telling you about like recycling rates increasing with a chart, or like showing you a scatter plot of like educational outcomes, and you can ask questions. It's like broken in a number of ways. It's inaccessible for certain people because of the timing. The idea that you can sit around and watch PowerPoint of data is like, that doesn't make sense to whole groups of people in the city. And then it's like the usual people show up. So we think there's ways to give alternatives to that model. So one of them is the idea that you look at an issue, and with a theatrical troupe, you devise a performance, a short 15, 20 minute performance based on data about that issue. You perform it, and then you have a facilitated dialogue afterwards about what people thought about what they saw. So we're going to do that thanks to a large grant from the Mellon Foundation. Thanks, Mellon. And we're going to try that out here in Boston over the next 2 years on the issue with community partners of gentrification and green space. And you'll hear a little more about that maybe and what it can mean for theatrical efforts. So I'm trying that as well. So it's trying to say like, hey, how can we blow this up? How can I create more examples to say, this is okay, and actually this might be more effective. So as a researcher, I want to study the outcomes of this, besides having the fun of doing it. I want to study the outcomes of this and try to take that toolbox and blow it up some more. So I call that popular data, just sort of as like the academic name, that set of principles that argue that this is the kind of stuff we should try. And it argues that this really isn't where we want to be. We need to sort of think more broadly than that. And for me, there's a reason I call the book community data. Like, it relies on community partnerships. Its work only happens in community, and I need that in those multiple ways it can be. It has to happen in that setting. It has to happen with other people's. So I invited a couple of folks to talk about that. So I'm going to pause for a minute and invite Lisa and then Marcus and then Juliana to come up and talk about how these types of ideas have influenced their work in community settings and what they think about the idea of mixing the arts and things like that. Lisa, you want to go?
Good try.
Yeah!
Oh my, okay. I had written a few things down, but now I'm probably going to try to wing it a bit more. But I just, how do I say this? Actually, you wouldn't think that maybe the same two people would give you a place to put the extra cutlery left over from your buffet, your wedding buffet, which I had stored in my basement until somebody said, we need a lot of cutlery here. And would call you up and say, can we take you to tea? We have this idea, we want to talk about this thing with data murals. And I think they kind of fell off their chair. They described it, and I said, yeah, when can we start? How many? Because it was just like, I started as an occupational therapist. You know, data was like how much you could move your arm, how many things you could do, how quickly. It was very individualized. But then when I got more involved in more public level of how healthy are we or not, I was like, we gotta think about this differently because people are really not paying attention to this, that scale. Everything was very individualized. So that was cool. But I also got involved in community environmental work. So we were doing like recycling and cleanups, and it was like, how many tons of something were you diverting from landfill and whatnot? But always it was like, how do we get people involved? Like, what are those stories? So I kind of found my peeps. These guys came. But they've also helped me realize some of the work that I had been doing, which was not quite as principled, but was really about those, how do we figure out what we know? I was also looking sometimes at what we don't know and who can sort of help get that information, but mostly like, how do we get people interested? And so I really appreciate that that's the work that we've done with the murals. It was, how do we create a dialogue and a conversation, often between people who would not have had that conversation without that provocation. So I think of a space about as big as from like that non-wall to here, the waiting room of a Head Start office in Somerville, that became the palette for this data mural that was created when we got public health people together and we got Head Start staff and Head Start parents and teachers. And I don't know, all I remember is like, okay, that's not the outcome that I would have necessarily anticipated, because we ended up with these images of kids going down a street and on their bike and walking, and they were going by the library and the health center and all these these places where people were providing supports, because to the parents, the story was that my kid can make it if they have these supports around them. It wasn't about, the asthma and the diabetes in the family or the food security. That was not their story. That was not what, so we did Up in the Clouds. We had a few cloudy things that might rain, but it was a very positive story that I'll never forget, the turning point.
So Marcus, you want to come up and talk a little bit?
Sure.
Thank you.
by the way, the design of these chairs is awesome. For a second, I was like, why do they have wheels? It's a little stable. It's really good for your core. And then somebody from that side of the aisle wanted to get out, and it's like, oh, that's what that's for. And then it's really back and then so really cool. Anyways, hi, my name is Marcus, and so I guess to talk about the maybe about the work that we've been doing with the drone sonification and CO2 emissions, I'd like to maybe make an analogy to a little story that I was thinking this morning, actually. So I always felt guilty that I feel like I live in an information bubble, which is the more liberal, and I tend to gravitate towards those news. And then before the pandemic, I forced myself to go to Fox News, and get more informed and see the same story and how, from different perspectives, to get more educated. But then this year, it's like it's been difficult. So I stopped watching the news. I know, just throw tomatoes, but news are no longer for me. And then I felt like, but I need to get informed somehow. And then how can I get informed in a healthy way? And I realized, you know what? I'm gonna look for the comedians. And then that's how I'm getting my information, my news these days, is actually through Comedy Central, through the Daily News, through Bill Moore. And that's been healthier, and I can still kind of follow what's going on in an easier way. So now to get to the point, I think I'm so happy to be here to celebrate you. Congratulations on your book. Thank you for inviting me to be here, because so this is, you're basically sharing to us how we can tell stories that are relevant to communities that sometimes are not properly displayed. So stories told by the community, and as you showed in the examples, that are creatively incorporating arts and other mediums, so we can still get the full scope without the usual extracting. We go in, we get a couple of testimonies, and a lot of the times it comes from the governor, the mayor, and the city, and the policemen, and the firemen, and so on. So this is a super valuable tool, so that now folks can use. So let's study this, let's learn from it, and let's figure it out how we can tell talk about the issues that are pertinent to us in our community in a more uplifting way, in the same way that comedians do when they are talking about the news sometimes, right? So again, I'm super grateful to be here to celebrate you. Congratulations. You are a role model. You are a citizen role model. I don't know how you do it, especially now that I see that you are in more projects than I knew. So yesterday we were talking, and you're a father, you are a drummer, you are a citizen. You exercise your civic rules, your civic engagement, I should say. So you're in a protest one day, and then the other day you're finding time to play badminton with your family. So it's been a pleasure to work with you, learning about how to sonify CO2 emissions, so we can revamp. How can we talk about this issue in a completely new, creative way using the arts? So congrats, and thanks again.
I'll pay you later, okay? Marcus, I've learned so much from Marcus being a collaborator, both in terms of the power of performance and the power of narrative in that performative way, but also like embracing, I was trained as an engineer, so like embracing myself as an artist and performer. I've learned so much from being able to participate and play together for like 15 years now. So it's fun to do something new together. So, Julie, do you want to come up and talk?
Hi everybody, my name is Josephine Ross. I am an artist, educator. Don't even worry. You can all know, what's my name? What's my name? Josephine. We already know. That's okay.
You're so good. Don't even worry.
Slay. Wait, just to be clear, what's my name?
Josie.
Never mind. Nice. My name is Josie, or Josephine. You can call me either. I am an artist, educator, and researcher based out of Boston. I originally moved here in the fall of 2021 for a master's program in learning design, innovation, and technology with Harvard's Graduate School of Education. I originally approached this program to understand how I could properly use mixed methodological approaches when approaching my areas of study, which are theater, educational studies, and psychology. And upon graduating from that program, I realized two things. Number one, I had so much more to learn. And secondly, there was this need for more systems to be developed in order for research at the intersections of these areas to be conducted more holistically and then also respectfully. So upon graduating, I made it a goal of myself to not only continue to teach and do research in academic institutions, but then also to really work directly with communities at the ground floor. So along with conducting research and teaching at universities like Harvard, Tufts University, Emerson, Boston University, I was like, I'm missing one. I made it a goal of mine to work and practice with community partners in the diverse communities of Boston. And an example of that direct work includes a position I've had for the past 2 years at Hyde Square Task Force. I've served as theater coordinator at this awesome organization. For the past, I'm seeing some nods, I'm like, yes, it's amazing. For the past 3 decades, Hyde Square Task Force has served the Boston's historic Latin Quarter, really focusing on how to provide Afro-Latin arts training, both folkloric and contemporary, to teens in the area, but then also creating educational mentoring opportunities for youth to plan what their lives look like post high school. My work with Rahul and Northeastern began because of Hyde Square Task Force. Rahul and the Data Theater Collaborative reached out to the theater program at Hyde Square to figure out if there was a potential collaborative project that could occur. And what followed was an amazing workshop that really allowed the theater youth at Hyde Square Task Force to answer the question, what makes them, as youth of color, feel safe in the green spaces of Boston? And that's connected to kind of what the projects you were discussing and how it's going to expand because of the Mellon Foundation, shout out to them, over the next several years. That workshop lasted 2 hours, and what the youth got to do was use their background in theater training to be able to articulate their thoughts and also personal lived experiences, which for them are very personal, very intimate, and very scary in a very safe way. This demonstrated to the youth, number one, that A, their voice mattered and that they have things to say. Even a year after this experience, you still come up to me and they're like, you remember that guy? And I'm like, which one? Rahul? Yes. And they talk about that experience. And they really felt, especially with a bunch of adults and faculty members coming in from Northeastern, really safe to share about their experiences, which I thought was remarkable. And secondly, for the larger organization at Hyde Square Task Force, it showed the staff there that there are faculty and staff at higher ed institutions who are willing to do research about these communities in a safe and respectful way, which to them in their 30 years of running has not been demonstrated. So now I want to talk about, yes, the work that you did and how it specifically inspired me. Like that work and that project back last March inspired me to think about the research and the way that I want to conduct my academic projects, specifically in the way to focus on amplifying youth voice and ensuring that they're not only just being listened to, but that they're actually the ones leading the design processes of these projects. So this past fall, I received a grant from Tufts University School of Medicine to create an improv theater workshop for the medical students, specifically focusing on developing skills in perspective taking, empathy, and socially conscious care. They asked me, as a white person, to conduct this study and to talk about my work with Hyde Square, and to talk about the experiences I've heard about the youth. But in thinking about your perspective and your mixed methodological approach, I asked myself, is that the appropriate way to approach this project? Whose voice needs to be heard and who should be leading this project at all? And I decided to use the grant money to train the youth to co-create, co-facilitate the workshop with me. And so what ended up happening was an amazing 2-hour workshop experience where the youth led the medical students through just basic improv games, and then they scaffolded them all the way to Theater of the Oppressed exercises, where the youth were leading them through scenarios that were inspired about their own experiences in the medical space, right? Like having to serve as a translator for a grandma who only speaks Portuguese. Serving as another situation was a young woman was being racially profiled because of her body and space, or the way she looked and the way that she was present in the space. What we found from that study was two significant findings. First, the medical students who participated in this workshop did see significant change in their empathy. So we actually saw that, wait, yes, this type of intervention is successful in impacting empathy. And fun fact, medical students out of all graduate level populations leave their study with the least amount of empathy. Which is so scary to know, right? Like they are the ones who are supposed to be treating us with the utmost care. That was one finding. And the second finding that we found was that med students and the youth facilitators alike actually developed more mutual understanding about the other parties' lived experiences, although none of them described it as a DEI-focused workshop. None of them, in both the qualitative and quantitative data that we collected. So that's really informative for us when you were mentioning about like this political moment, this political climate. How are we talking about this? How are we collecting this data? And you showed me a way that improv and theater is really a valuable vessel for these learnings to occur. So in reflecting on my trajectory as an artist and as an academic, I also want to just say, it would be remiss for me not to mention how Rahul in the last year has really impacted me. In this past year, I've been applying to PhD programs throughout the country, and I've been trying to look for academics who were focused on asking questions, not the exact same questions as me, but like asking questions in the same way as me, which is being really curious about how we're conducting research, the interdisciplinary approach of how can we pull from theater, how can we pull from data and visual arts. And when I was going through this research process of which PhD program to which I'm applying, I kept going back to Northeastern, and I kept going back to Rahul. And as of literally this morning, I can now proudly call myself a Husky. I have committed, and I will be a PhD student in the Interdisciplinary Arts and Media program this fall. And I'm so lucky to be able to say that, right? And going back to what you said earlier, this is a very unique time to be in higher education. It's a really unique time to be able to like commit yourself and also have the tools and resources to be able to stand up for what we want to ask questions about, stand up for what we think is right. And so getting the privilege to be able to speak directly to that and then also start on the ground floor on these projects is something that I'm extremely privileged to be able to say I can do. So I want to say like, this book and these tools are really impactful for me as a young researcher who's just beginning her academic career, right? But I think that this tool, the tools that are provided in community data and also the work that you're doing just provide an awesome it's an awesome language that anybody in their career can utilize. So I'm just excited about us as a community, how we can together be impacted by this work. So thank you, Rahul.
Sorry, I don't talk about the work, but that's really nice. Thank you. So obviously, I'm like the old guy now, right? And like both in terms of like getting things wrong and like gray in the beard, and it's time to sort of like welcome new generations of people that are younger and are like the smart ones that are trying new things and pushing the edges. So as much as like this work can, part of my goal is to like so many times canonical examples define what we see and what we think is possible, right? So we see like these amazing visualizations, they're animated, and we're like, this is what's possible. And like hopefully my goal with this work is to like try to push that door open and say, oh, more things are possible, right? So it'll hopefully create space for more creative people to come up with ideas that like the rest of us old farts won't think of, and do even more creative work. So hopefully the book will also serve some of that role to say like, this counts. This counts as doing data work. It counts as creating community change. It counts as data storytelling. It doesn't have to be fancy dots flying around on a black background. That's cool too. And there's more stuff that can be done. So that's it. I'll stop. There's some more food. The books are in the back. I made a fun Lego version of a book cover. You're interested in that. Thank you so much.
For selfies.
Yeah, for selfies. Right there with the book. Thanks for coming. And Maybe we can stop and we can either do discussion or questions. What have you guys been doing in general, Pablo?
Yeah.
It's just for fun.
We can like stand up and walk around, or
I
we sit
mean,
for a while. What do you think?
the floor is yours. But if people have questions and want to talk to you or your community partners, or talk and walk, whatever.
Talk and walk at the
Awesome.
Questions.
Yeah, maybe we'll see. Does anybody have like a question that's a well-formed thing with a question mark at the end that they want to ask? Otherwise, we can talk and walk and chat.
Talk, walk, and buy the book.
Yeah.
Ah,
Well, let's do that. I feel like that's more fun. Let's do that. Thank you for sitting for a little while.